Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of The Ownership Effect. I'm your host, Jim Bonham, President and CEO of the ESOP Association in Washington, D.C. On this show, we'll take you on a journey into the world of employee ownership, especially ESOPs, or Employee Stock Ownership Plans. You'll see why ESOPs are a powerful but still overlooked tool to create better companies and more broad-based wealth in America, and why ESOPs can be a very attractive exit strategy for business owners who want fair market value for their companies, but don't want their legacy to be destroyed by selling to private equity or to a competitor. Together, we'll explore what happens when workers share directly in the success of the companies they help to build, and how business owners can do well while also doing right by their employees and communities. In this two-part premiere, we're going to explore what I call the miracle moment. That's when the founder of a successful business decides to sell their company to an ESOP and become employee-owned. In part one, today we're going to hear from Gary Shorman, the chairman of Eagle Communications in Hays, Kansas. Gary's going to give us a little bit of history about his company, from when they were founded to when they became an ESOP, and the impact of that decision on the employees, the company, and the communities it serves. You're going to hear about how so many people's lives were changed because of a decision someone made a long time ago, and how that decision still reverberates across the company and the communities it serves today. Today, we're here talking about what we're calling the miracle moment, when a business owner makes the decision to sell their business to their employees through an employee stock ownership plan. Now, you were there when your company's founder, Bob Schmidt, was going through that process. So, Gary, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us, who you are, where you're from. Tell us about the company that you helped run.
Well, I'll talk a little bit because I was thinking about this on the way in, Jim. I'll be celebrating 40 years with our company. And
Wow, you're that old?
Believe it or not, I'd say I started at 12 when I was 12, but that would be a lie.
Okay.
So anyway, when you go through that kind of decades of work at a company, you get to see different parts of the company, how it runs, how the company is formed, how it was put together, all those sort of things. And so you talk about the miracle moment. It's probably not a miracle moment as much as it is a miracle transition that takes more than just one moment, but there's that thought of how do we get from point A to point B. Eagle initially started as a small community radio station, KAYS radio, and AM back in the day when AM radios were AM radios, and that was the voice of the community. And we still try to do that today, but we've transitioned from not only one AM station to nearly, we're at 41 radio stations now.
And where do you operate?
Midwest, Missouri, Nebraska, and Kansas. And most of those have multiple radio stations where, you have the AMs, you have them, you have the country, you have the rock, you have the Kansas City Chiefs. Always a good thing to have the Kansas City Chiefs in our area, unless you go to Nebraska. And then maybe the Denver Broncos.
The Broncos are.
And the Cornhuskers were up there. So, but we cover everything as a community-based, support the community, talk about the community, and that's what we do every day.
And the company was started by Bob Schmidt. Tell us about Bob.
Well, Bob started with another group of local investors. And again, there were no radio stations in the community. There was no voice of the community. So 5 different businessmen got together. Bob was one of those. But Bob was a broadcaster in the group and ended up buying out the others that were there.
Okay.
And everything from, the morning show to be a part of that to sports. He would be the first to tell you he was terrible at sports, but he liked going to the game. So he had good seats when he was there, but he liked doing that. But really his best thing was being a part of the community. And that continues today because he continues through a foundation to support the community and other things that were important to him over his life because of building that process of community-based broadcasting, community-based support.
And you're in Hays, Kansas, as your headquarters, and in those smaller rural communities, You're right. Those radio stations, they sort of pull everything together. You're at the Friday night football games. You're at the basketball games. You're given the farm report at 5 o'clock in the morning when all the farmers are in having their coffee before they go out in the fields, and that it seems to that sense of community was a real driver for Bob Schmidt and for Eagle Communications, that you were part of that fabric.
Bob, at the base of everything, really loved people.
Yeah.
And he loved the people that worked for him because he worked there right with them. And when the transition or his thoughts of what do I do next came into play, the ESOP became one of those things.
So how did he become aware of the ESOP option, the employee ownership option?
Well, in the state of Kansas, there was a gentleman by the name of Mike Oatman out of Wichita, and they had an employee ownership process going on down there. And Bob was friends with Mike, and so that was one of the options, but it probably wasn't the first option.
Right.
Bob, being in his 70s, was saying, I have to do something else. He did not have children involved with the process. And so it says, how do we evolve this so that when I'm gone, this continues on?
Right. So what about the ESOP sort of brought him over?
Two parts that were important. One is being in the community. Once you sell to another firm that is not based in the communities, all of a sudden the control, the local focus, the dollars go somewhere else. And, when you go through a broadcast career, you see that. And I know Bob saw that with other transitions of, here's what happened to the radio station when it was sold to somebody from Chicago or somebody from Kansas City.
Right.
The base goes somewhere else. And so staying local in our community was important to him. The people aspect of it made sense as well, because if you have the right people, an ESOP will work. If you're struggling with people who, can't get the job done, or performance is not there, it doesn't make an ESOP very successful in the long term. And so he had a little bit of both. He wanted to keep that in the community, wanted to have good people that would continue on. And then there's another word that comes into play a little bit about your legacy.
Right.
And so you look at, okay, we can sell to another group, which in some cases is hard in rural areas, or a little more hard in rural areas. So that was an option. I mentioned the gentleman in Wichita could have sold to a Wichita group. But again, the focus does not remain local. It goes somewhere else. And so in the process of looking at all those different things, this was about a 2-year process of looking at different things, including taking the management team and saying, hey, do you want to buy this? And how you would go about that process and what happened there. And ended up in the ESOP process just made more sense. It just hit everything that he wanted to do. And so I think the miracle moment you're talking about is being able to check all those boxes of things that he wanted to do. And I think you go down that list and he said, boy, this happens. So now how do we make it work?
Right. Now, one of the things that I've heard some ESOP founders say is that, well, I gave the company to my employees, but that's not really what happens. The employees are actually buying the company from the founder, and the ESOP becomes a mechanism of finance. It's a leveraged buyout. Can you just explain a little bit how that works?
Well, and I'll explain how it worked for us, but I've seen it happen in some other situations as well. That when you have an ESOP that once you want to go through that transition, Bob would say this. He said, the ESOP was really good for our employees, but it was also really good for me. And I think as many of the founders that go through this process realize that there's some trade-off. They like still being involved. And up until the day that Bob passed, he was all Eagle all the way.
Now, he didn't sell the whole company to the ESOP all at once, right? He sold it in percentages.
Yeah, so this was back in 97, 98. And the process was put together so that we could buy 35% of the company.
Right.
And then in the contract, we could buy over the next then there were some variables on this, but another 10% and another 10%. So we would end up as an employee-owned group having a majority ownership in the company.
And why was the 35% important?
Well, the 35 was not as important as the 55 because 55 represented majority ownership by the ESOP.
Sure.
And also represented majority share price.
But at 30% ownership for the ESOP, that's where the federal tax credits and the federal tax benefits start to kick in for the company so that you can deduct both the interest and the principal for the loan to buy the company. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And in the process, there's also on the other side that the founder of the company
Right.
can take the money and put it into I'll say a like-kind fund,
right,
and avoid paying taxes until those funds are sold.
That's the 1042
account.
Right.
And so a little bit of the magic in all this is Bob decided if he could put the money in the 1042 and proceeded over the years to keep that money in the 1042 when he passed, that same money goes back into his foundation.
Wow.
That now we're using to support the community and others in that same gifting way of taking that money to do that.
Yeah, that's something that I've heard over and over. I know you've heard this as well, talking to other founders and talking to ESOPs around the country, that ability to stay in your community after the company is sold. And, you go to the high school football game on Friday night, or you go to church on Sunday, and you look around and your former employees are there, and they're still coming up to you saying, "Hey, thanks so much for what you did for us and for keeping this business here." And you contrast that with so many of our small towns around this country where a private equity firm has come in and bought up the local business. I think of places like Sydney, Nebraska, where Cabela's used to be headquartered, and they got purchased up and rolled into Bass Pro Shop and these larger chains, and the wealth that was retained by all of those employees in Sydney is just not there anymore. And it has such a multiplier effect when those profits are paid to actual people actually living in your community. It helps the banks, it helps the restaurants, it helps create that local economy that's a virtuous cycle. So talk to me about what happened at the company when the employees learned that they were now owners.
Well, one of the things that most people, when you look at, you have I'll say an aging owner, the thought process is, somebody working on the air, doing a broadcast, et cetera, going, wonder what's going to happen when Bob Schmidt sells. Am I still going to have a job?
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen? And so going through the process, one, you have to find a good firm to be able to help navigate and make this work. And again, as I mentioned, it was a 2-year process of making that happen. And so as you get that process in place, obviously the paperwork, you have to do all that sort of thing. We, in our case, had internal trustees, so we didn't have somebody outside coming in. And to some extent, it was a surprise to the employees. We had a company meeting, still have some video of this, and where Bob talks about what he wanted to do, and you have everybody sitting in this room. You see their backs, and they're listening to Bob talk about the future of the company, and everybody is thinking we've sold.
Yeah.
And
you had.
And we had, but he sold to the employees. And to hear him talk about that.
Yeah.
And then he turns it over to me to talk about the next generation of Eagle. And we do that. So we go through this whole process, and I want to go down the road probably 15, 20 years after that. One of our senior employees that was at that meeting received his first ESOP check.
Wow.
And it was a nice check because he'd been there for 20 years. The company had grown. And he called me. He said, "Gary, I just have to tell you that I thought this was BS." Now, he used the real word, but he said, "I thought this was BS. But now I get a check." And he said, "That was real." And that took 20 years for that to transpire. Talk about miracle moments. The miracle moment for the employees on that is when they get their check.
Yeah.
Because they see it on the certificate every year. They see it when I'll show up and I'll talk about how good we're doing and all that sort of stuff. And everybody, shakes their head and goes, go, 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 Eagle. But when they get a check and it's a lot of numbers on this check,
Yeah.
that's a miracle for most of our employee owners.
Well, it could be life-changing.
It is. And most of them, in many cases, had not had much financial planning. They didn't need it. Their financial planning was making it to the end of the month or
Right.
saving, through their 401k, et cetera. But our ESOP was 10 times, maybe 20 times better than most people who were participating in a 401k.
That alone, the fact that you have both the ESOP and the 401k is head and shoulders above what most companies do. Because one of the things I always remind people of is that retirement plans are voluntary for an employer. So if you're lucky to have a 401k, almost half of Americans don't have any type of retirement account that's been set up by their employer. So the fact that most ESOP companies have both the ESOP and a 401k, it speaks to the type of business and the culture that you might have at an employee-owned business, which is different. So talk to me a little bit about what it's meant for your customers and for people outside of the company that you're employee-owned. What's the reputation of Eagle Communications?
If you drive around Hayes, you'll see Eagle signs everywhere. You'll see vehicles, you'll see billboards, you'll see signs on stadiums, you'll see signs on the wellness center that have Eagle there. So that's that local commitment that we've had, and I think our customers see that same thing. The belief, though, comes through being a good broadcast station, a good marketing company, that we get in and do the job. We see them. We come back every day. We've been there for years, decades, literally. And so the fact that now the employees own it, talk about it on the radio, you hear it all the time. You say, hey, I'm part owner of the company. We need you to look at this. And it gives you an inroad to those companies. And in many cases, I just had a call the other day from a company that said, I know you guys are employee owned. How did you get there? Because I'm interested in the same thing.
How does it change your employees' sort of day-to-day behavior in terms of the way that they are approaching their jobs?
What you start to see is that there's some buckets of people, in a sense of, if you have 100 employees, you'll have 20, 25% of them that'll be champions.
Right.
They're the ones that are over there turning off the lights. They're the ones they're the ones that'll pick up the phone and call the CEO and say, hey, this isn't working right. You need to fix it, because again, it affects our company and our bottom line and our ESOP. There's that group in the middle that is happy to be there because they really didn't know what they were going to do, and now they happen to be part of an employee-owned company. And as the years progress, they see their certificate grow. They see their friends getting checks. They're going, this is really cool. And then there's always a 20% at the bottom that are sitting there going, I'll sell my shares for some beer this weekend. And so
Right.
you always have that in a company. But if you can get that 80% number, 20 at the top, and the other 60 in the middle that are charging forward and doing that,
Yeah.
that helps you be so much successful, other than say, okay, we're just making money for whoever
Right.
and showing up whenever. But people do get the job done, and they'll go above and beyond because they feel like they're a part of the company.
Yeah. So you've also been involved in the public policy around employee ownership, and have been helpful with your congressional delegation and with lawmakers. ESOPs have been really successful in maintaining a bipartisan environment. Why do both Republicans and Democrats think this is a good idea?
Well, I think most of them are smart enough to realize that the money stays in their district, in their state, because of local ownership. And this, in end of the day, is local ownership at probably the best level, because each employee is a part owner of the company. And so to say that local ownership is good, this is local ownership on steroids, because every one of those people are out there doing it. And for the most part, they're all voters, which makes a difference as well. And so anybody that's on the public policy side of things is, how do we make this easier? And what I've seen, whenever government involved, making things easier is really not what typically happens. And you see that's developed over years. And I think you and the association over the last several years have really made some inroads to be able to, let's say, streamline the process, but make the process easier.
Yeah.
When we went through it in 97, 98, there were a lot of hoops to jump through. There still are.
Right.
But today, if you can see how you can be a S Corp at 100%, it makes the path pretty clear. Ours, we had to do out over a period of years. We had to make that all happen, had to do the paperwork behind, each one of those. And so there's a lot of that is complicated.
Sure.
Today, the efforts I think that we're trying to do is to make it simpler so that any company that is reaching a maturity age, like Bob was at that point, that they want to transition, that the ESOP becomes a real opportunity for their employees, a real opportunity for their community, and even an opportunity for them to find a way to have a legacy that now their company that they've built for the last 10 years not only stays around in their community, but is a leader in that community as well.
Also, not lose sight of the fact that these business owners, this is their largest asset, and they want to get true fair market value when they sell their business, whether they sell to a private equity firm or sell to a competitor. They want to be able to get fair value if they sell to their employees as well. And that's one of the things that we've, as you know, worked on very hard, is to make sure that the process of forming an ESOP doesn't cause these founders to have to take a discount on what they are paid for their business. And they shouldn't. The price that the employees pay should be fair market value.
Be fair.
And I think that the regulatory environment over the last couple of decades had been leaning in the direction that so many protective measures were being put into place that deals became more expensive, that there was a significant cost for insuring. And now it looks like the environment is now shifting dramatically in the opposite direction, because ESOPs are not a new thing. They've been around for 50 years now in their formal legal status. And we've learned a lot about how to run them and how to form them, and the success rate is really tremendous. So the ability to form an ESOP and hopefully bring the cost of forming an ESOP and operate an ESOP is coming down, and which is something that we're pretty excited about as well.
You look at the people that'll come and talk to you about what you're doing is really cool, Gary. How do I make it happen? And I think that's been one of the bigger barriers, is how complicated it has been. Not that you need 14 consultants and all of that, but you get talking about trustees, you get talking about who comes in and manages, who are your people going to do that, what's the paperwork process of doing it. Whereas if you just sell to an outside firm, you get your check for $100 million and put it in the bank. So whoever it is that's in that process of being a founder working through the miracle moment, is they have to have a little bit longer view of success.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to get rich quick, an ESOP process is not that. But it is a great process for a founder of a company to be able to transition their company, get the same money out of it they would have had they sold to somewhere else or somebody else, and at the same time be able to keep that in their community and make that something that they can be proud of when they walk away.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case when it comes to private equity or other types of divestitures.
God, I think that's a great way to end. Gary, thank you so much for coming and sitting on our podcast. We're going to be making new releases about every week or every 2 weeks. So we're excited to have leaders like you who have been in the trenches and helped form employee-owned companies, and talk about your experience, and hopefully we can inspire a lot more of our business owners across the country to take on this important charge.
Well, Jim, I'm excited to be back here because you and your leadership have transformed what's happened in the ESOP world. And so I hope people that are listening out there say, hey, let's take the time to really look at it instead of saying, okay, ESOP, that's a good story. It can really work for people, not only the people who are selling, but the people who are going to be those employee owners down the road.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of our 2-part premiere of The Ownership Effect. As you heard from Gary, Eagle Communications is a great success story, but there are many more like it across America. And as you learn more about employee ownership, I think you'll find that while ESOPs can come in all shapes, sizes, and industries, that miracle moment has played a big role to help turn good companies into great ones. Be sure to join us for part 2, when we speak with Drew Tavs, the CEO of Mid-South Building Supply in Springfield, Virginia, as we dive even deeper into the miracle moment. And we learn more about the process of how an already successful company can become an ESOP. Thanks for listening, and please remember to subscribe, like, and rate us on your favorite podcast player and our YouTube channel. See you next time.